All right, well, good evening. I'm Marina Glisovic. You usually see me on 7 on Your Side, but tonight we are live at the state office of AARP Arkansas. We are holding a Teletown Hall and Facebook Live event. We'll be talking about everything you need to know when it comes to voting, changes in voting laws, what you need to know before you head to the polls. We've got many updates, where and when to cast your ballot for the March 5th primary. So we'll have a couple of polls as well that you can answer. Now, you may notice that we have a live audience. Say hello, everyone. Hello. Now, just because you're not in the studio with us here this evening, you can still call in. You can also ask questions on our Facebook Live page. Now, if you do call in, when you're on the phone, you'll just press *3, and we'll be able to answer your calls. Now, we have some wonderful helpers here who are manning the phones. And tonight we will take your questions and pass it along to our experts. So let's meet this panel of experts. We have Ryan Owsley, who is now the Chief Deputy Attorney General for the Arkansas Attorney General's Office. We also have Chris Madison, who is the Director of the State Election Commission. Good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so I'm looking forward to hearing all the questions and obviously getting some great answers from our experts. But for now, I'm going to toss it over to AARP Director Ashley McBride. Hi.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us live. Thanks, Maureen, for that wonderful introduction of our guest. We look forward to tonight's discussion with everything you need to know to successfully vote in the March 5th election. But first, we want to share a little bit about who we are. At AARP Arkansas, we are a branch of AARP, the nation's largest nonprofit organization. We are also nonpartisan, meaning that we are dedicated to empowering all Americans 50 plus to choose how they live as they age. And you may not know this, but membership is open to everyone. So we want to share such information tonight, as well as information about caregiving, saving for retirement, and fraud prevention, all key issues here at AARP Arkansas for people of all ages. At AARP Arkansas, we are the innovative champion for the 50-plus population through impactful advocacy, community outreach, and education that also empowers you to choose how you live as you age. So our state office is located in Little Rock, but we serve all Arkansans thanks to our wonderful volunteers located statewide. We would love for you to turn your lifetime of experience into an experience of a lifetime as you serve alongside our wonderful volunteers. Learn more about our work at states.aarp.org/Arkansas. At AARP Arkansas, we've created an online voter guide to help answer some common questions. You can text AR votes to 22777. That's AR votes to 22777. I'll remind you about this a little later in our program. And now, let me toss it back to Maureen and our panel to get this discussion started. With this reminder, if at any time during our call you have a question, press *3.
Thank you, Ashley. And so let's just get started. Chris, maybe not everyone knows what the State Board of Election Commission does. Talk to us about what you guys actually do.
So it's actually interesting. Everybody knows the Secretary of State is the chief election official. And the Secretary of State's office handles the contracts with our vendor for our equipment, things like that. And they have an elections division that helps with the equipment side of it. So the State Board, however, we have 4 primary areas. Our first primary area that we tend to is we actually provide the training for election officials. So your local county board of election commissioners, your county clerks or their designees, the trainers who train all the poll workers that you will deal with in the polls, those are all trained by us. That's one of our responsibilities. One of the second responsibilities we have is we actually reimburse the counties the cost for the primary elections. So the counties front the cost, and then pursuant to our rule, they request money from us. Through the rule, we handle about $4.5 million is what goes through our office in the primary year. The third thing we do is obviously we monitor election law legislation that's going through either on the national level or at the state level to see how that impacts our procedures and practices. And then the last thing we do is we are a civil agency that has enforcement authority for election law violations and voter registration issues. We have a process by which we bring in complaints properly filed, and we investigate those and kind of determine whether it's an administrative issue that relates to the procedures, practice, or training, or it's something more nefarious, in which case we hand it off to prosecutors or the Attorney General's office.
Well, let's skip over to the Attorney General's now. So let's talk about some of the ballot titles. You know, the Attorney General's office is in charge of approving, you know, ballot titles and amendments get on the ballot. So what's that process like for people who don't know?
Yeah, so by the Constitution, we have a system in which citizens can initiate legislation. It can be either an actual statute that they initiate, sort of a grassroots effort, that get enough signatures, they can get on the ballot. Same thing for constitutional amendments. The first stop in that process is to prepare a summary of the law that they want to put forward the voters to decide. That summary is called a ballot title. The ballot title has to be given to the AG's office for review. Our office reviews that to make sure that it's an accurate summary of whatever the law is that people want to put for the voters, and that it's not misleading, and there's a few other legal requirements. The AG's office has been conducting that review for 80 years, with the exception of about 3 years recently, and the process has now come back to the AG's office. It's the identical word-for-word statute that was in place in the 1940s. I know that because I've compared every word, with the exception of one small change. But it's the same process. And so the AG reviews that stuff, and then by statute, the AG will either accept it as the ballot title as it's been submitted, make some changes, or reject it and give the reasons why. And the people can submit new ones, and then we'll review. Usually takes about 2 to 4 times before someone's ballot title is certified. That's the term the statute uses. Once that happens, then the people who are the supporters of that can take it, and those are the people who approach you with the clipboard. Would you like to sign my petition? What they're giving you is a signature page that is prepared by the Secretary of State in terms of its form, and they're supposed to be presenting you with the ballot title as well as 2 other aspects of it, the text and the popular name, which I can go into if there are questions.
Sure.
So that's how the process starts, and if they get enough signatures, then they can get on the ballot in November.
And the signatures are certified as well, right?
Yep, so the process is they get all their signatures, and the number of signatures that they need to get depends on whether they're going to go for a constitutional amendment, which is about 90,000 plus, or a statute, which is a little bit less. And once they get all their signatures, then they have to, there's a constitutional deadline, it's in the summer, they have to submit all their signatures to the Secretary of State. At the same time they do that, they send their ballot title to the State Board. And then the Secretary of State will conduct a signature review. And they will count, it's always a 2-part. One, we just count the number of signatures. On their face, we don't look to see, the Secretary of State doesn't look to see whether whether they're real voters. We just count them up. And if you don't you don't chin the bar of your 90,000, whatever it is, they don't go further and do the more laborious work of determining, are these real people? Are they registered voters? If you do chin the bar on that initial count, then they go further and they find out, yep, sure enough, this is so-and-so, and they live at it, and they're a registered voter, they can sign this petition. And so all those 90,000 plus, or whatever the number is that you need, they all have to be registered voters, and the Secretary of State does that work.
And that's when we see those different ballot, questions on.
Yep, that's
and
right.
So speaking of the ballots in general, Chris, a lot of people may want to see what's on their county ballots. How can someone get a copy, or how can they see their ballot before going to the polls?
That's a great question, because the first thing you can do is use your favorite search engine and search for Arkansas Voter View. And on Arkansas Voter View, I use that every day when I get calls from voters and I need to look at their ballot or see where their voting precinct is or where their options are. You go to it, it's hosted by the Secretary of State, it's a vendor, but it's through arkansasvoterview.org. And you can punch in your name and your date of birth, and it will bring up your voter registration information to verify the address that's listed for you. It'll have the ballots. In the primary, you have 3 options, Republican, Democrat, and nonpartisan. You can review those and see what races are on your ballots. You can also see the polling locations you can go to, the times, and all of that stuff at Arkansas Voter View. The second place, real quick, is always contact your county clerk. Your county clerk is your head official for your voter registration records. They're the permanent registrar. So if you have questions about your voter registration, county clerk.
And so you mentioned, Republican and Democrat. So in the primaries, do you have to pick a party for your ballot?
You do. You don't have to be a member of the party.
So you don't have to register.
You don't have to register. You can be unaffiliated. In fact, I think 85-90% of Arkansas voters are registered as unaffiliated. And we have functionally an open primary, which means I get to go up and say I want to vote in the Republican race, or I want to vote in the Democrat race, or I don't want to vote for either of those, and I just want to vote for my local judge. That's the nonpartisan judicial race. So, but yes, you do have to make a choice. And the way to think of it is the primary, you're selecting the candidates to carry the flag or the banner for that party in the November general election when the two parties go head to head. So really right now you're picking who's going to represent represent the Republican Party for JP5, or maybe the Democrat Party for JP5. And then those two will then face off in the November election.
Do we see that people that may vote Republican in November decide to take a Democrat ballot in the primary just to...
I have no idea. No, I mean, so once you get to the November election, your primary election choices don't matter. You can vote however you want to in the November election. So we're not able to determine that because once you're checked in and you have your ballot and you cast it, we can't tie that ballot back to the voter.
So you couldn't see if somebody voted Democrat or Republican in the primary?
That's correct.
That makes sense. And so, speaking of ballots, I want to ask, and whoever wants to answer this one, absentee ballots. Say I've never voted absentee. How do I do that?
I had a feeling that was going to come to me. So absentee voting is an alternate way of voting that allows you to basically vote at your home. And the first thing you have to do is obviously be a registered voter. Got to do that to do any of this stuff. The second thing you have to do is you submit an application to your county clerk requesting an absentee ballot. That application, the information that you provide on it, that you fill out, that you sign, is compared to your voter registration records. Basically, we're checking, are you who you say you are? Okay, and that's a county clerk responsibility. Once the county clerk is satisfied that you are who you say you are, that you're a registered voter, they will mail you or give to your designated bearer your absentee ballot packet. When you get that back, then you as the voter will fill out your voter statement. You need to include a copy of your photo identification in your absentee ballot packet when you return it. You fill out your ballot. You put your ballot in the ballot-only envelope. You put the voter statement and the photo ID in the outer envelope. You seal it all up, and you send it back to the county clerk. Then during the election, after the election, the day of the election, basically, there's rules on this, the County Board of Election Commissioners takes that application that you submitted to the county clerk to get the ballot. They compare that document to the document that's inside the ballot envelope. And what they're doing is, okay, so the clerk verified that Chris Madison requested an absentee ballot. Then they're going to look at the paperwork that's inside with the ballot. Is this from Chris Madison also? And they're going to compare that information. So you've got two different sets of people looking at it, making sure the voter is who they say they are, and that we're counting their ballot and protecting their right to vote.
And I know that this is a question we get every election is, do I need to bring my ID in person when I cast my ballots?
Absolutely. That's, I mean, the Arkansas, very simple. Amendment 51 to the Arkansas Constitution, it's been amended, and you must present photo identification. If you do not present proper photo identification, and proper is issued by the United States of America, the state of Arkansas, a post-accredited secondary educational institution of the state, lawyer term for schools.
Sure.
And then the fourth is you can also get a free voter ID card from your county clerk. Mm-hmm. You must have basically one of those entities providing you a identification with your photo and your name on it. You have to have that. If you do not have that with you, you can still vote. You will vote a provisional ballot, and you have until noon on the Monday following the election to provide your qualifying identification to either the county clerk or the County Board of Election Commissioners, but you have to come back with your ID to do that.
That makes sense. And so I wanted to ask you, Ryan, so I believe that the Attorney General's office, because just, you know, you want to make sure there's no funny business going on when people are casting their ballots, people are following, you know, polling laws and such. You guys have like a specific division for that, right?
We do, yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, thank you. So we do have an election integrity division in the office. And anybody, if they see something that they're concerned about from an election integrity perspective, you can just go straight to our website and you can send an email directly to that division, or you can send one just to our general oag.arkansasag.gov, Office of Attorney General, and that will get routed to that election integrity group, which is certified law enforcement officers who are familiar with the election laws in the state. and we have authority to investigate those things under certain circumstances. So yeah, and that's a real division. There are real people. I know them. I was just talking to some of them today. You know them.
I do. I
Yes.
talk to them 2 or 3 times a week.
There you go.
And so, Ryan, I mean, how serious, specifically over the last, I'm not going to guess how many years, but several years now, that, you know, false information has been out there on social media or
Yeah.
wherever you can find it. You know, how serious do you guys take election integrity at this point?
Yeah, well, I mean, we take it very seriously, and my boss takes it very seriously. My boss wants it to follow the law, and he wants everybody else to follow the law. And we have certain authority given to us by the General Assembly to investigate certain things and bring charges, under civil charges under certain circumstances, or criminal charges if the prosecutors bring us in on that. So yeah, it's a real thing. We have very strong election integrity as it is, but in every election cycle, I think it's fair to say, there's always someone who's trying to do something. And we have a solid set of fences in place and a solid set of people who are there ready to investigate and make sure things are right.
And if I might add to that real quick.
Absolutely.
My office also does investigations. So we obviously have the Attorney General's office as a tool, but our job, one of our primary responsibilities are investigating election law complaints. So if you have something that you see doesn't look right, you contact our office, you file a complaint with us, we'll work through it. And what we often find, most often what we find is about 85% of our complaints are something procedural, something non-criminal, non-nefarious. About 10% are probably somebody made a mistake, should have gone left, but they went right type thing. But it's not nefarious, it's not criminal. There's probably a 3 to 5% where, hey, this is something a little more serious. And then from our office, we can turn it over and work with the Attorney General's office in their election integrity unit. And that's how we have been processing the past year or so since they've been in. And it's a great addition to our opportunity, our ability to investigate these things. So we work hand in hand with the AG's office on that.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, how do you guys try and prevent any kind of fraud, or maybe somebody tossing a box of ballots, you know, on the back of the truck, or oops, we didn't turn in that one USB that had the electronic ballots on it? Like, what do you do to try to prevent it? You can't prevent the unforeseen, but
So first off, this is actually something I discussed with my staff. And so we talk about election fraud, right? It's a big term. That's the big umbrella of stuff. And really, election fraud falls into a couple of different categories. Okay, the first category that we've all seen and heard about is, you know, the equipment, right? The equipment changes votes, right? Well, we test the equipment beforehand. We test the equipment while it's going on. We're encouraging county boards to test the equipment after the election and before the certification. Our office does a audit of the ballot results, the election results. We've done that over the last 2 elections. I have personally hand counted about 7,000 ballots.
phew.
And verified over 2 years,
Sure.
but verified that the tabulators counted them correctly. Okay, 100%. Right. So that's one of the things. The equipment works well. The second area we have for election fraud is, quite frankly, in absentee voting, and the reason being is because you have the votes being cast in the public. They're outside of the protection of the polling location. But we have procedures on that. The county clerk checks the registration information. We document who else is handling the ballot on behalf of the voter. We document that on the paperwork that comes in. We have the ID requirements. We check the signatures, that there's comparableness to it. And then our office has the authority to subpoena those records and review them. We actually had a law passed this last session that gives us authority to do our own review of these paperwork so we can check up on it on the back end. So that's that portion of it. The third and most challenging portion, and this is quite frankly why we're here, is the disinformation or the misleading information that's published on social media. And the challenge you run into there is, quite frankly, is you have confirmation bias, where somebody knows there's something wrong, and then you see this post on one of the social media platforms, oh, well, this confirms that this is going on.
Right, right.
So the key in that is really us as election administrators and officials with the state being forward and out front saying, hey, here's where you go vote, Arkansas Voter View, check your stuff, check your ballot. If you have questions, call your county clerk. If you don't get good answers from there, call us at the state board. If you don't like the answers you get here, call the Attorney General's office, call the Secretary of State, because we're all working to ensure free and fair elections. And so we're checking it on the front end, on the middle, and on the back end.
This is great explanation. Let me add one thing to
Of
that.
course.
As Chris was saying earlier, part of this issue here is, where do I get good information?
Mm-hmm.
And he answered the question you asked earlier about people being able to see the ballot before they step into the booth, because sometimes there can be a lot of information on there. And if you sort of get a preview of that ahead of time, you're much better off. So he gave some examples about how to find that information ahead of time. I'll make the same kind of statement about these ballot measures, because when you go, a canvasser approaches you and brings you one of these little clipboards and says, would you like to sign the petition? 9 times out of 10, the person says, what's it about? Well, the what's it about is written on the thing. All the stuff that people have been seeing in the paper over the last several months is the discussion about what is on the piece of paper to describe to the voter what it is that they're presenting to you. And if you take the 60 seconds or whatever to read that, you're going to have an adequate, accurate, non-misleading summary of what is on that thing that they're asking you to sign. Fast forward to the voting booth. Once the things get on the ballot, they get their signatures and so on. I'll give a plug for an organization called the University of Arkansas Cooperative Extension Program.
They do a great job.
If you Google that and then Google, just add ballot issues or whatever at the end, they have a wonderful booklet that they put together every election cycle that has in it the entire language that you'd want to know for the ballot measures. And often they have a little column of someone who's for it and a column of somebody who's against it. So you can see 2 different sides of whether you ought to vote for it or against it. And so that gives you a ton of information before you step into the voting booth that I would commend to you.
I want to take a pause and see, do we have some polling answers, some questions out there? I don't want to ask all the questions.
Well, thank you so much, Maureen, for turning it back over to me. As a reminder, if you have any questions and you are listening live, please dial *3. If you have any questions, please dial *3. Before we get to the poll, Maureen, we do have a question from Facebook, and this is Gary asking, what is the purpose of early voting?
That's a great question.
Go for it.
Early voting is, quite frankly, it's interesting. I didn't get to attend National Association of State Election Directors a couple weeks ago. I was out for a medical procedure, but I went a couple years ago. And it surprised me how many states don't have the extensive level of early voting that we have in Arkansas. And quite frankly, early voting is extra opportunity to vote. That's what it really is. It is an opportunity to go to your county clerk, or if your county has some off-site early voting locations, like I live in Saline County, they have off-site early voting locations that are outside of the courthouse. It is your opportunity to go vote during the 2 weeks before Election Day. Because the biggest challenge we run into and have in the past on election is there's only so many seconds in a day. So what we've done by early voting is that we've expanded the number of days, which increases our number of seconds, number of opportunities for you to go vote. And it's just like the Election Day voting. You show up at the early voting location, you check in, show your ID, you go vote your ballot, and you're done, and you don't have to worry about it on Election Day.
Because do polling locations get super busy on Election Day versus other days? I mean, is it an easier time for me to early vote?
It can be. So it really depends on the election, principally. But I will say we've noticed a trend over the last 3 or 4 cycles of early voting representing anywhere from 40 to 60% of the total votes cast.
Wow.
Because you're doing it over a 2-week period. And generally the first day of early voting in some locations you'll get lines. But every time I go early vote on the Wednesday or Thursday, like I'll probably go vote next week, I'll walk in, do my thing, and I'll be out in 10 minutes. I mean, because it just gives you so many more minutes of the day to vote. Whereas Election Day, you know how it is when you wait to the last minute.
Sure.
Then your car's not going to start. You're going to have a flat tire. Interstate 30 is going on. Just
Potholes
potholes everywhere. So by early voting, you get more opportunities.
Makes sense.
Let's turn now to our first poll question. For those tuning in across the state on your phone, how are you planning to vote in the March 5th election? Press 1 for voting early in person. Press 2 for early but absentee. Press 3 for going to the polls on Election Day. Again, that's press 1 for voting early in person. Press 2 for early but absentee. And 3 for going to the polls on Election Day.
And I think there's a pound. Pound one? Is it pound one maybe?
That is
Just
pound.
wanna say. I want to make sure we get
That
some
is
polling,
pound. Sorry,
you know?
press pound 1 to answer the question. Thank you so much, Maureen.
No worries.
So
no
our
worries.
live audience, they have been waiting very patiently to ask us some questions on the floor. I think we have one right now, eagerly awaiting. Would you like to ask your question?
Sure. You need to.
And please state your name before your question.
Thank you for this opportunity. I actually have two questions. The least important I'll ask first. My name is Mac Faulkner. I'm retired and therefore have the luxury of being a volunteer, unpaid, fully trained poll worker for the Pulaski County Election Commission. I think there are very few of us. I've always felt that election is probably one of the most important things we do on this planet. It guarantees our way of life, as we've seen by the people that want to come here. So my question is, are you able, or have you focused on using people like me? If you're going to have 11 days of early voting versus one regular day of voting, if there are a lot of volunteers that would be willing and able to be trained, you're an employee of the commission, you're not a poll watcher, you're a poll employee. I would think there's a big resource there that would help with the early voting days. And I have a second question I'd like to ask in a minute.
Okay, well, I think that's probably a question directed to me, because
Go for it.
I don't think it's an AG kind of thing.
Go for it.
All right, and I don't think the reporter wants
No,
to take that.
I'm not
Okay.
answering that.
So yes is the answer, absolutely. So the training that I talked about earlier, we encourage, beg, plead, demand of the election administrators, your county board of election commissioners, your county clerks or their designee, the coordinators, I forgot to mention those, or the trainers who train the poll workers, to constantly be looking for new opportunities to bring in poll workers, to bring in retired folks. We talk about using your volunteer clubs, contacting AARP, things like that, because there are people that want to do this, that want to do some civic duty. And we encourage, push, beg, plead, kick, stomp to go out and find stuff. It's one of those things, a lot of election officials, we use a lot of the same people over and over, right? Because it's easy. And one of the things I want to do as the director for the state board is really encourage and push our expansion of our workers, our people that are coming to do this. One of the programs that was passed, legislation before, was actually the ability to use high school students. They get a day out of school to come be a poll worker. And if they're trained, they get to do all the things you get to do. I don't know about you, but most teenagers know how to work a tablet way better than I do. You know, I mean, so that's a source. And we want our experienced poll workers. We want you talking to your community groups. Absolutely. And in fact, we're looking for monitors for the state board. So if you're interested in potentially getting sent to a county to go monitor on behalf of the state board, to be eyes and ears for us, we're recruiting monitors. We'll train you and we'll send you out. You can kind of look at our website, State Board of Election Commissioners, and we're looking for monitors. We'll be doing another round of training this summer for folks for the general election. So yes, we are always looking for more people.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. My second question is a little different. I've been involved with software quite a bit in my past life, and do you actually get the code from your vendors, computer code, that you can actually look at and see if there are back doors that could be used to access the information, like such things as even just a unique password and username? The computer software can direct you to a different program through these back doors.
So I am not a computer expert. In fact, when I do the training, I talk about if you had me in your poll, I would be your sticker hander outer, you know, the person that hands out the I voted sticker. That would be me. You wouldn't let me near the tablets. I will say that our agency does certify the equipment that's here. And
I'm talking about software, not the hardware.
And I was going to get to that, is that the software is part of the programming for the hardware. So all of that is certified through the Election Assistant Commission and certified labs, and we certify that equipment. As far as the details of that, that's actually a question for the Secretary of State's office, because we don't do the vendor relationship. That's to the Secretary of State's office. So any vendor can have their equipment certified in Arkansas through our agency. The Secretary of State's office selects which vendor and which specific equipment is used.
Okay, and the last question, if I could.
Use that too.
How are the election rolls cleaned of deceased people. All these deceased people could suddenly be absentee voters pretty easily.
No, they can't. So the county clerk, as the permanent registrar, is constantly updating. They get files from the Secretary of State's office. I think it's a monthly dump or every couple of week dump of death records from the Department of Health, and those are cleaned up. That's one way I know. I know many county clerks that actually look at their obituaries, because they're a small county. I mean, we're a rural state in a lot of ways. They look at their actual obituaries, and they'll know Chris Madison, he kicked the bucket, you know, and so they'll be paying attention to those things. So really, your county clerks are your primary on that, and they get data from Department of Health, the Vital Records Division, I think is what they're called, and they're constantly cleaning those things up. Also, I will tell you, our agency has also been recently granted the authority to review the voter rolls, and that's one of the things we're going to be looking at, is ensuring that if we have some out-of-state issues, that we're checking those against our in-state people.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you so much for your questions.
All three of them.
Maureen, we have another question from Facebook Live,
do it.
and the question is from Sylvia. What are the proper identification pieces that they can bring in to vote?
That's me.
Yep.
You should know
Well,
this. You read them
went
in
there
51.
before.
You would, okay.
You're the guy.
All right. So first off, it has to have your name and your photograph, okay? And it has to be issued by the United States of America. Passport. Like I have one of the TSA pre-check cards. That works. Or the state of Arkansas. Your driver's license, your ID, your concealed carry license, if it's issued by the state of Arkansas. I have a guy in my office who worked for the Secretary of State's office in 2000. He's got a photo ID that still has his photo and his name on it. It doesn't have an expiration date on it. Issued by the state of Arkansas, it would qualify. You can also use your college ID if it's a post-accredited secondary institution, educational institution in the state. Think college, all the trade schools that are licensed in the state, if they issue you an ID with your photo and name on it, that qualifies. If you have none of those, you contact your county clerk, you provide some utility bills, checks, things like that to verify your identity, and the county clerk will issue you a voter-only ID card that will work also.
Perfect.
Awesome, thank you. We have one more question, and this one is from our callers that are listening live. And this question is from Robin. I want to see if we can bring her on live. Robin, are you able to hear us?
Yeah?
Feel free to go ahead and ask your question.
I was wondering about exactly how, as a poll worker, how if the law has changed, because last year I got to do the general election, got to work ahead of time, and then for the regular election, and now this time coming up, they said that you guys had limited them to how many people could do that work. Is that our office or is that your office?
I'm not sure I understand your question. What county are you in?
Logan.
Logan. I know there's a minimum number of people that have to work each polling location. The law requires 4. We encourage them to have no less than 6. But it also depends on the number of polling locations. So if you had 10 before and you've reduced down to 8, then you don't necessarily need as many. So I don't know if I can really answer your question without knowing your specifics. If you want to, you're welcome to call my office tomorrow, and I would visit with you and get more details from you about your specific circumstances.
The number is?
It's 501-682-1013.
1013?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. All right, Maureen, back to you.
Okay. And so, Ryan, I think this might be a question for you, but when someone is convicted of a felony and they lose their right to vote, can someone apply for a second chance when it comes to reinstatement of voter rights?
Yes, they can, and that's not common in a lot of states, but in Arkansas it is. the basic requirements for them to make that application, you have to have completed whatever the sentence was. You have to have completed any kind of probation, parole. The parole, probation, those rules have been significantly changed recently at the recent legislative session going forward, so that'll become less of an issue. And you have to be paid up, essentially, in all of your court costs, fines, and fees, and so on. So if you meet those three criteria, and this pertains to felonies, this disqualification doesn't apply in the context of misdemeanors, but if you were disqualified by virtue of a conviction, and you meet those criteria, you can get it restored.
What if I'm facing a felony but hasn't, been convicted yet?
You have to be convicted in order to be disqualified.
Just want to make sure that was
Yep.
clear.
Yep.
And so, let's talk about some of the things that people may not. Oh, hello, anyone? So let's talk about some of the issues that we've seen in the past where, Ashley shared some statistics earlier about voters tend to be 50+ years old. And so I just want to touch on, is it acceptable to bring others to polling places? Can I round up a church van and take all my church, congregation members, friends, and family to go to the polls?
So, yes, if we want a caravan or all pile up in a bus and go to the polls, we absolutely can. In fact, my grandparents, before they passed, the nursing home they were at, they would do that because they were still mobile and able to do it. They would load them up in the nursing home bus, drive them to the polls, let them go vote, give them a day out, take them to get ice cream, and go back home or back to the nursing home. So yes, you can absolutely do that. The trickier question becomes, though, is when you go into the poll. So if you have a child who's in your care, so for example, I want to take my kid to see me vote, I can absolutely do that, as long as the child's not disruptive to the voting environment. The issue comes into, there's another issue that goes into assisting voters. So I can assist up to 6 voters. So I could assist, any 6 people in here, and that is in the marking and casting of your ballots. I can't assist more than 6. And that was a law that changed 10 years ago or so, I think. And it's the idea of I can assist you in marking and casting your ballots because you may not be able to read that well, or your vision, like my grandfather got macular degeneration, couldn't see that well. So I'd be able to go and assist him do that. So yes, you can load up in a van, and yes, you can go in the poll with your kid. If you're going to assist someone, there's a log you have to fill out so that we limit you to your 6 that you can help.
Perfect. I want to talk about special elections and things, unfortunately happen. We know that our state treasurer passed away, Mark Lowry, and so I imagine that there are 2 people now vying for his seat, and that's going to be something people are going to see on the ballot. Can we talk about, what that process is when that happens?
Yeah, so the process is any state office, when someone dies in office, at the state level, the governor appoints to fill the vacancy. At the local level, let's say at the county level, for example, if you have a JP who dies in office, by statute and also by constitutional provision, the quorum court decides by majority vote who's going to fill that seat. So there's always 2 questions here. The first is, who decides who appoints to fill the vacancy? And the next question is, when's the election? So the way that the election laws are structured in Arkansas, the rule of thumb is like this. We want to have elections sooner rather than later. We want to have elected positions be filled by people who are elected rather than appointed. We recognize that sometimes you can't get an election up quick enough, so that's why you have the appointment process, to have somebody in there who can do the job while we're waiting for the election. Typically, the basic rule of thumb is we want people to be in the position who are elected, so there's about a 4-month lag. So the rule is basically like if the vacancy occurs within 4 months of the next election, then that seat's going to be filled by election on the next cycle. Okay, so there's like about a 4-month window. If it occurs 5 months before the election, it's going to be filled in that election, because we want people to be, who are in elected office, to be elected and not just appointed. So those 2 questions: who appoints and when does the election occur?
That makes sense. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that, just because I think a lot of times when unfortunate events or life happens, that's one of the number 1 questions that
Sure.
we get. speaking of questions, do we have some more questions that way?
Well, before we go to more questions,
Sure.
I would like to share the poll results. So we have 69% of people that are saying they are early voting in person. 0% said they would be voting absentee, and 31% said they would be voting on March 5th, so on Election Day. Before we toss it back to Maureen and the panel to answer more questions, I wanted to share a little bit about voting trends AARP is seeing across the country. According to an AARP poll of 2024, general election voters in the 40 U.S. House districts, candidates, regardless of their party, could win votes by supporting policies that lower prescription drug prices, help older adults live independently at home, and support family caregivers. 4 in 10 voters 50 and over are currently caring for a family member and have the potential to make a difference in the voting election. In 2022, the election shared that Arkansas had 584,000 voters over the age of 50. In each congressional district, that equated to between 31 and 40% of voters. So voters 50 plus, you are impacting elections. Keep up the great work. Remember, you can be a part of this awesome conversation tonight by commenting on Facebook Live or listening in on the phone by pressing *3. Again, pressing *3. Maureen, back to you.
All right. So one of the terms we hear a lot is Super Tuesday. March 5th is Super Tuesday. What does that even mean?
So, I actually searched it because I wasn't sure how many states and things were in it. And so I used my favorite search engine. I'm not going to advertise who it was, but I used my favorite search engine. And there's actually 17 states or territories that are having some form of election on Tuesday, March 5th. And the majority of those involve presidential primary, and that's why it's called Super Tuesday, because there is a huge number of delegates that are up for grabs for candidates for it. And Arkansas and Tennessee and Texas are 3 of the states, and the reason I thought those were interesting is we all share the same state bird, which is the mockingbird, which I thought was an interesting fact.
That is an interesting fact. People are often intimidated to run for office. So if you could, either or, tell us what's the process when you put your name out there in case we have anyone that's listening or watching that's interested in maybe running for a seat of some sort.
Yeah, that depends on what the seat is. It's a very different process depending on the seat. The more local the race is, the fewer the steps, and the more statewide, the more the steps. There are some positions that you're going to run for where you have to have a certain amount of money that you put up for get yourself onto the road. There are certain ones that you have to, if you want to forego paying the money, you have to get a certain number of signatures of people who support you. So it depends significantly on what the actual role is. You can probably speak some more to the specifics.
I was actually going to say, if you go to the state board website, arkansas.gov/SBEC, we have a publication under our publications tabs called Running for Public Office. It is the plain English version of how to run for office, and it goes from constable to president of how you run in Arkansas.
So it will give you a, whole...
It tells you the who, what, when, where, time, the steps you need to take, and we are statutorily mandated to publish this manual, and our directive was the plain English of how to do it.
Cool. Switching gears. How many counties in Arkansas still use paper ballots?
You know, that is a great question. Every county in the state uses paper ballots.
Interesting.
So the issue about paper ballots is you voted, right?
Sure, of course.
You go and you get the thing out of the marking device and you look at it and you go to the next device. That's your paper ballot. Okay? The question that has come up is about hand-marked paper ballots. Pulaski County, for example, uses hand-marked, the bubble fill-in on election day. But they use the express vote equipment in early voting because they just don't have enough marking devices. There's other counties that will use the bubble marks for like election day stuff, but every county in the state has the ability to do the express vote equipment. I know of one county that's going to the hand-marked, hand-count paper ballots. we'll see how that works out here in Marksville.
What county, can you tell us?
Searcy County.
Oh, interesting, just because, or?
That's a good question for Searcy County folks.
So each county can decide if they want handwritten,
There was a law that was passed this last session that sets the rules by which they can do it, but ultimately it's a quorum court decision. There are additional hoops you have to jump through to do that, and quite frankly, we have a really good system that works well, that's efficient. You like getting results about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. If we go to hand mark, hand count paper ballots, we might get results by the time we need to certify.
Which is?
10 days after the primary, for the primary election.
so Searcy County, we're not gonna know what,
So part of the
Results are-
that we adopted actually requires the paper count to be done through a tabulator, so we can have those unofficial results while they do their hand count to get their official results. But if those don't get timely done, then the unofficial become.
interesting. Well, I wanna send it back to Ashley.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. We have one studio audience question, and I believe this is going to be the last question. So would you please join us and ask your question and state your name?
Thank y'all for this opportunity. I'm Susie Marks. I do have two questions. Take a pen. Okay, so if someone votes and passes away, does their vote count?
Okay.
And if somebody calls and challenges, I know so-and-so died, whatever. So which office handles that? And secondly, with identification, we have to go to the polls, and the first question is, what's your address?
Mhm.
And then I show my ID.
Mhm.
What if my address has changed, or my address is different than on my ID?
So let me take these.
Go for it.
I had a feeling you said that. So the first question about voting passing away, hopefully you have voted before you passed away. That's kind of the key requirement. There is actually a set of rules that talk about absentee voting, that talk about if you have postmarked your absentee ballot and then pass away, there's rules that apply to that. I don't remember them offhand. Obviously, if you're voting in person, you're alive when you vote. If you pass away after that, you've already cast your ballot. It will be counted. Because once it's in the box, it's going to be counted. As to the second question of ID and address, I actually instruct our trainers who train poll workers to put their thumb over the address on IDs. The reason being is I don't care about the address on your ID. I care about what you say your address is, and I compare that to the data in the voter registration records. I want to see the photograph and the name, and I'm going to do what we call Bernetta in our office. I'm going to look at it, look at you, look at it, say, yep, that's you. So really, we don't care about the address. If the address is different on your ID, that doesn't matter.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you guys so much. I think that we are already running out of time. We went by so fast, but I want to send it back to you, Ashley.
Thanks, Maureen. On behalf of AARP Arkansas, we want to thank all of you for joining in and thank our wonderful moderator as well as our expert panelists on providing such thorough information about voter education. We don't want to forget to honor our panelists again. Chris Madison, Director of the State Board of the Election Commissioners, as well as Ryan Owsley, Chief Deputy of the Arkansas Attorney General's Office. Thank you for being here. Please give them another round of applause. A reminder to get out and look at our election guide, just text AR votes to 22777. Again, AR votes to 22777. AARP Arkansas is here for you. Our events and ways to engage as a volunteer are listed at our website, states.aarp.org/Arkansas. Again, states.aarp.org/Arkansas. Maureen?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening and hope you have a great night.
Thank you all.